Welcome to Smart Talks Sabah, and I am Joanna Suhaili Rampas, and today's conversation strikes at the heart of Sabah's long-running legal quest for fairness. With me, someone who has been there from the start, it is Datuk Roger Chin, the immediate past president of the Sabah Law Society and a key voice in the state's constitutional struggle. And when Roger last joined us in 2023, the Sabah Law Society had just taken a bold step at that point of time, filing a judicial review over the 40% revenue entitlement owed to Sabah. Now, that move, of course, made headlines, and of course, it's also stirred debates. And it brought Sabah's constitutional rights into the national conversation. Now, with me today here in the studio, the second time, is Roger. Thank you so much for...
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming here again. Welcome back. And so after all of that unfolded, as I mentioned just now, the last time you came here was like 2 years ago, right? And you were just filing a judicial review at that time. So let me begin by asking this. Where does Sabah stand now in this 40% struggle, and what hangs in the balance this coming week?
So what happened after the last time I was here, the judicial review is always two-stage.
Yeah.
The first stage is going to be a leave. You need permission to go on. And the next one is substantive hearing once permission has been given to proceed with the case. So we've been stuck at the leave stage, the permission stage, for a good 2 years and more. The reason being, initially when we won at the High Court getting leave, it was appealed to the Court of Appeal, and then subsequently it got appealed to the Federal Court as well. So by virtue of that, that slowed things down a lot. So 2 years later, where we are now at is, fortunately for us, we managed to succeed in the Court of Appeal and the Federal Court, and the permission, the leave has been maintained. And now we are at the substantive hearing part of it, and that was held on the 7th of July 2025, and that is where a decision will be made regarding whether or not what the prayers are, whatever SLS wants from that, will actually be given. A decision did not come out on that day because it will take several months. The judge has actually asked for several months to give the grounds because the judge says that it is a very a serious and a very complex case, and the judge wanted to give justice to the decision and come up with good grounds, which I would completely agree with her because there are ramifications either way, whatever the decision is, and that is why we are where we are at the moment.
Right, and we're very hopeful to hear some good news out of this.
So are we.
Yeah, okay. So let's widen the lens, right? Okay, 40%, and of course this is all from, I mean, the core issue is that this is part of the agreement of MA63, right? And for decades, Sabah has heard promises about MA63, right? And you see, now there's also a point where there is special committees, technical papers coming out, federal statements, but very little has materialized to the point that, SLS is now bringing it up to the court now. Now, would you say that is this MA63, is it still a viable legal tool for Sabah's autonomy then? I mean, from a legal perspective.
So there are two schools of thoughts here.
Yeah.
I think there's one school of thought who says that MA63 has failed.
Yeah.
And by it being by it having failed, then you should maybe come for a new agreement, perhaps. That's one. The other thing is to say that it's gone, it's void ab initio, meaning it as if it should never have been entered into. And the third one is to say, which is the stand that we're taking, that there's a breach of the agreement. And that is why we are saying that due to the breaches, what are the consequences? So there are three major approaches, basically, right? And I think for us, like I said, we've taken the stance that there is a breach of the agreement, and there are consequences from the breaches, because I believe it's easier to talk about a breach of an agreement that was already made, entered into, rather than try to formulate a brand new agreement. Why do I say that? A brand new agreement would presuppose that people actually can even agree. Now, Malaysia is how old? 60 years?
65.
Right? Yeah, 65. 60 odd years. And in those 60 odd years, it's quite obvious that we can't agree on how to revenue share, because if we did, the action would never have been filed. It would have been negotiated a long time ago. It would have been settled a long time ago, but it wasn't. So what does that mean to try to negotiate a new deal? Because don't forget, what we got at the formation of Malaysia was what we needed. Okay? Any form of negotiation, as can clearly be seen, will be less than whatever we managed to get at the formation of Malaysia. To think that we will get similar or even more, that's very foolish and naive to think that it's impossible, right? So to say, let's talk about a new deal, the new deal will nowhere be any better, and it certainly will be worse than the old deal, which is MA63.
Yeah. So you're agreeing for having a brand new deal? Agreement?
No, not at all. I'm saying no, because it cannot be any better.
Better, right? Yeah. Okay. So don't you think that this has become like, when we look at this whole situation, I mean, that would be talking from a legal perspective, but now I'm looking at it from a political point of view. You see, has it now then be a political script for every elections now? I mean, every time elections coming, elections around the corner now. It has been. I feel like it has been repackaged too many times to still carry constitutional weight, especially in the in every political scenario that we have here in Malaysia.
So I think you're right, Joe. I think there is a lot of MA63 fatigue.
Yeah.
This fatigue is, I can see it seeping in, and I know that there's only that much you can carry on. But can we just analyze it a little bit carefully and actually say, when did all of this even become a thing? It wasn't a thing for a very long time. Okay, for the longest time, it was not an issue that was being fought over. Okay, and this is the issue when you have parties who are there for very long, and when the ruling parties are there for very long. When they are there for very long, they focus on different things, right? Because you are not beholden to any particular issue to win. You are there by virtue of you having been there for a long time. Inertia, if you want to call it that. You are there. And because of that, you would not be pushing any agenda. So the agenda of MA63 was lost for many, many decades. And don't forget, Malaysia is only 60 odd years old. So when I say many, many decades, it means that a lot of the time was completely lost on implementing this. So to be honest, this MA63 fight, although yes, we are fatigued listening to it, it's a new thing. Okay, I think it only basically came out in the last 2 elections at the most. Okay, which is not that long. Don't forget, Sabah's history of 2 elections actually means not 10 years. Shorter than that, and it became a thing. Now, to be honest, I hope it's not dropped as an issue, because if it's dropped as an issue, it means that a lot of the things that we are hoping for will never materialize. Maybe I'm not sure how we can do it, but at the moment, whoever is going for elections obviously still needs to talk about it, because it's not fulfilled. When the time comes, majority of the things have been fulfilled, then yes, of course it should be dropped as an issue to be fighting for. But the problem is, like I said, for decades, it wasn't an issue, and it's only been an issue in the past 1 or 2 elections, and because of that, it's too new a thing to drop, and we should still fight for it until the day where we can actually get the majority of what MA63 was given back, promised, or achieved.
I feel I concur with you when you actually mentioned to me that, this talk or this cry about MA63 has been rather recent, although yes, it's issue that has never been fought over. But I've always said that, probably my generation, we're the same generation, I say, but we are sort of like the uninformed generation. Okay, and then you have people like yourself, Roger, and of course, I only started reading about this only after I left high school, although we learn about history, but there's never really mentioned about MA63.
Yeah, in fact, can I just chime in here and say that this is the problem. History, I think even the people who are going through school today, history books are about Majapahit, Srivijaya, all of these things, formation of Malaysia, and how Malaysia was really formed. You're still taught about August 31st, Merdeka Day. You're not really taught about the significance of Malaysia being formed. You're not being taught about how Malaysia was formed between 4 different distinct groups, Sabah, Sarawak, Singapore, and Malaya. You're not taught about the Malaysia Agreement that was entered into and what the promises of nationhood were at that time. So this is the reason why, yes, there is no knowledge until today. There is no knowledge. Not only don't say during your father's time or during our time, the generation that is going through school today, if not because of this awareness that has been coming on, like I said, only in the past 1 or 2 elections, they would have no clue about this.
Right. And don't you think that this is also due to the fact that there is, all this while we have seen the federal government has always been maintaining a majority, a single party, that is being the government. But then over the last 2-3 elections, we have seen that there is a decline of one single party. And it is at the point now where the federal government is not as strong as how it was before. And I feel that, this is also the right time for us to also have a negotiation with the federal to say, look, okay, don't you think that this is the situation that is also going on right now? Because I feel that before this, any time you talk about MA63, that's it. You're going to jail, ISA.
Yes.
But since the federal government has not been as strong as it was before, and now this fight about MA63 has also been, it has been very loud. Yeah.
So I think that's exactly right. The reason why this thing has surfaced or allowed to surface is because Sabah and Sarawak are basically the keys to power, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right? The keys to power, and this is due to the past several elections, federal elections. And by virtue of that, because Sabah and Sarawak are needed to form a government, whichever government it is, it has gotten recognition in terms of the wants and wishes of Sabah and Sarawak, which are actually MA63. They're not asking for anything more or anything less than what was promised them when they joined Malaysia. And when I say that, can I also mention it's not an issue about saying it's not in the Constitution. A lot of people argue this and say, look, it's not in the Constitution and therefore you're not entitled to it. Okay? But there are 2 sides of the coin. When you say that, then you have to look at the other side of the coin, which is how about those things that are actually in the Constitution? For example, the 40%, 2/5. That is very specifically written in the Constitution. But notwithstanding that it's written in the Constitution, why twist it, or maybe twisting it is the wrong word to use, but why interpret it in a way that does not give Sabah its 40%? So for those things that are not there, the argument goes, sorry, it's not there, and therefore you're not entitled to it. For those things that are there, like the 40%, the 2/5, the way they're handling it is by saying, sorry, that's not what it means. It means this. Okay, so it looks like no matter how you look at it, we're shortchanged. Okay, so I think the big issue now is rather than saying whether or not it's in the Constitution. The other thing that is also similar to this issue is the 1/3 parliament seat issue. Okay, the argument would be it's not in the Constitution and therefore you're not entitled to it. Okay, but I want to go back one step and to the starting point, which is the spirit of MA63.
Right.
I said this before and I'll say it again. It should be the thing that we all be looking at, rather than saying it's not captured in the federal constitution. It is captured in the federal constitution, but I interpret it another way. Why don't we just say, look, I respect the fact that when we form Malaysia, the spirit of MA63 captured in IGC, captured in Cobalt Report, Cobalt Commission, captured in all the MA63 Act and so on and so forth. They're all there. That is the spirit of MA63. And that may or may not have made its way to the Constitution. Some of them didn't. Many of them it did. But even those things that did not make it into the federal Constitution, why can we not say that when we form Malaysia, we appreciate and we accept that this was what the parties intended to do, the spirit of MA63. That would actually also then, therefore, encompass your 1/3 parliament seats.
Okay.
Because, like I said, if you want to look at it in the Constitution and say, no, it's not there, of course it's not there, right? But if you accept that the spirit of MA63 is the foundation of Malaysia, you would then accept that the 1/3 should be there, it's not there, and you can work towards that, rather than arguing that it's not black letter law. But like I said, even if it's black letter law, why then say it's interpreted another way?
Okay. And Roger, you've mentioned about, it's, you said just now that whatever, there is that issue of interpretation now, because now we've seen at federal level, the federal government has already acknowledged the fact that the Sabah and the Sarawakians are fighting for what has been written in paper, right? Okay, when we formed Malaysia in 63. Now, I realize that now we are just bogged up into this argument of interpretation, right? I mean, for example, there's this issue of 40%. The federal government continues to sort of defend its stand by referring the review, which was fixed. I think it was it was fixed at 26.7 million,
Correct,
right?
yes.
Right. And it remains valid until a new order is issued, and that
Correct.
was in 2022.
Yes.
Okay. Now, more recently, this is interesting. You see, more recently, the Prime Minister stated that Sabah has, received 16 billion federal development, okay, and expenditure in 2024, right, and which is far exceeded the 40% claim. Sort of like that, it was mentioned in that way, implying that this a form of federal government generosity. Now. But let's look at the math. 16 billion is only about 6.3% of 255 billion of our annual development budget. Okay. And even though Sabah contributes at least 6 to 8% of the total national revenue, the GDP, but you see, I recall, if I'm not mistaken, I recall you've stated in your statement saying that this is a misrepresentation of the 40%. So perhaps what's your thought about this? Because federal has a different view on this, but then of course, we follow the law. You're a practicing lawyer. How do we navigate this?
So I think the only people who seem to know the figures are the federal government.
Yeah.
And I think the state government has worked out what it thinks it's the figures. But quite clearly, the only people who know what the actual figures are the federal government. Now, the problem is no one knows what he's talking about when he talks about how many percent, or whether it's excess, whether it's way more or way less, because the figures were never revealed.
Yeah.
And I think this is the biggest problem. If you want to say that it is what you say it is, it's beyond, way beyond, by all means, break it down, show the figures. show how much we actually collected from Sabah. And when you show how much is collected from Sabah, you've got to show revenue derived from Sabah. That actually means taxes that are paid by, say, the plantations. The big plantations are mostly from West Malaysia, whether it's IOI and whatever, right? Felda, they pay their taxes mostly in West Malaysia. So show us where the plantations made the money from. And if it is in Sabah, put that into the figure. Show us transparently that these are the figures of revenue derived from Sabah. And then tell us your 40% is so much and we are paying way more than that. And don't confuse it with the development grant, because a development grant is a completely separate issue. Do not add the 40% with the development grant and then say we have given you more than the 40%, because the development grant is the federal government's constitutional duty to give it to the states, including Sabah. And that one you cannot mix up with the 40%, because the 40% is not the development grant. But if you say that it is more than the 40%, please show us transparently rather than just say it. This is how much we've collected. And as far as I know, until today, it's never been showed. So if that is the case, how can we actually just accept anyone's word for it and saying that it's way in excess of your 40%? How do we know? We have no clue.
Yeah, I concur you with that, because so the thing is, everyone has their own interpretation now, and of course, the best thing to do is to just go back to the court and let the court interpret the whole thing. But then you've also, let's move on a little bit now. You've also recently commended, right, the state government for actions like establishing the Sabah Energy Commission and acquiring the 50% stake at the Semarang oil field, right? With both seen as signs of assertive action by the state government. So do you think that, with that, is this also a sign of development of real constitutional progress? I mean, not only from the state government side, but also the federal government side.
So I think I thought that one certainly is part and parcel of reasserting our rights.
Right.
So for example, you talk about energy. From an energy point of view, what happened was Sabah gave away its rights to energy, and that's why at one point in time it was the Federal Energy Commission that was determining whether or not a power plant could be built in Sabah, right? So that by forming ECOS takes it back so that we can actually do that. And now in terms of the getting 50% of oil and gas assets and all of these things, these are very important. Why? This is part and part. So there are two actions going on at the moment which will redefine how Sabah moves on in the future. One is the SLS 40% action. The other one is a Sabah challenge against the Territorial Seas Act. Let me explain a little bit why that actually matters. Because I've talked about the SLS matter before. So the Sabah action goes this way. What it is saying is that the Territorial Seas Act, which limited Sabah's waters from 12 nautical miles to 3 nautical miles, is illegal, unconstitutional. And if it's successful, what it means is this: it would then extend our waters back to 12 nautical miles, which a lot, if not most, of the present oil fields, gas fields are actually within this 12 nautical miles. So by virtue of you being at 3, where there's hardly any oil and gas assets, versus 3 onwards to 12, that's where most of the assets are. What it would mean is this: then you start to see how perhaps certain acts like the Petroleum Development Act, PDA, may no longer have a leg to stand on if the Territorial Seas Act is unconstitutional. And then, theoretically speaking, it's possible for Sabah and Sarawak to then get back all those assets out there. Maybe not get back, but definitely have certain rights over those assets that are between 3 and 12 nautical miles. And definitely in the future, anything that is found would belong to Sabah, assuming Sabah's action actually survives and succeeds. So these two actions taken by NGOs will, to a certain degree, form Sabah's future.
Okay. And when we look at this whole situation, it seems that parties now, every single entities are now moving towards the courtroom. But don't you think that there also needs to be a political will for this to happen? Of course, this stems to from for which why SLS Sabah is bringing this matter to court. But do you think that this is there needs to be a political will as well for us to move?
I think they've been talking. Let's not say that nothing's been done.
Sure.
I think a lot's been done. I think my only concern, and I said this earlier on in another piece, is this: that because of the change in government, we are reinventing the wheel again. So every change in government, instead of taking what the other committee has done, they start all over again. Okay, and by the time they finish, they are very near to elections again. And you pray that it may be a similar government who's sympathetic to the past findings. But what happens if it's not? What happens if it's a new government who comes around and then they reinvent the wheel again? These are very difficult decisions to make. You're not going to be sitting down over a cigar and agreeing with each other and say, okay, brother, done deal. We can sign this agreement now. It will take years, if not more decades of negotiations, because we're talking about big sums of money that everyone needs. Sabah needs, and the federal government needs as well. And because of this, it will never be an easy negotiation. But like I said, the problem now is this, that at every time we seem to be reinventing the wheel, new committees are formed, and then they come back very near to, let's go back to the 1 year everything resolved. Remember, that was a promise made, right? Within 1 year, everything will resolve. Hello, how many years forward are we now, right? I think we are at our 3rd year, right? We've gone past that 1 year. So that gung-ho-ness of saying that we can settle it will go to show you that it's not true. It cannot be done, right? We are negotiating. So what we need to do is wrap up negotiations, agree, and move forward. And because they can't do that, this is where political will fails. We need to go to court. Let the court decide, because the court is basically the arbiter of what the Constitution means and whether you're entitled to it or not. If governments fail because they cannot agree, notwithstanding, I'm not saying they didn't try. They tried very hard. Everybody tries very hard. But there's only that much you can do when you stand on opposite polar sides.
We'll be back after the short break. Okay. Welcome back to the second segment. And Roger, moving on from 40%, MA63, and of course the Sabar claims, right? Now, beyond 40% MA63, we often talk about reclaiming revenue, but autonomy is also about governing services that matters, right? So we always hear people talk about, in fact, decentralizing health care, education, transport, etc., etc. So while the idea of decentralization is appealing, of course, for Sabah, but I feel that Sabah is still facing systemic gaps like weak infrastructure, fiscal limitation, let alone governance fragmentation. So how do you think, is this viable for us to, of course, yes, the idea of decentralization is the best for Sabah, but with the current situation that we're having right now in Sabah, how can we make sure that this will be, materialize?
So I think we need to go back and look at the Constitution when they talk about the federal list, which are the federal powers, and the state list, which are the state powers and also the concurrentness which both federal and state can actually legislate for and claim power over. I think what needs to be done is whatever is in the concurrent list and whatever is in the state list, these things should be kept and should be strongly defended by Sabah. Okay, so there are many things out there which, for example, the concurrent list where Sabah is not actively in, areas that Sabah is not actively in, which they could actively be inside. So why do I say this? Because Sarawak is a very good example of staking claim to the state list, staking claim to the concurrent list. Okay, so staking claim to the concurrent list, because remember I said both federal and state can legislate in the concurrent list. And what it actually says in the Constitution is where the concurrent list is there, if federal makes a law, then basically as long as it does not conflict, if both state and federal makes laws in the concurrent list, as long as they don't conflict, then they both stand. Okay, Sarawak has been actively camping out on the concurrent list and enacting laws so that they can cover those areas. Okay, and therefore it means that they have authority over those areas in the concurrent list, including healthcare and so on and so forth. What Sabah has not been doing is Sabah has not been actively camping out on the concurrent list. We should do something similar to Sarawak. Just anyone open up the Sarawak legislation, look at the prevention of diseases, and this was very telling during COVID, prevention of diseases, and you will see Sarawak having many enactments in their statutes versus ours. Okay, ours is I think it's one, if not two. Okay, versus their many. So what that means is that yes, there may be gaps, but the gaps are something that we can work towards later. So if we say we have no money, if you say we have infrastructure issues, why don't we just start out with the easiest step first, which is put our flag down over those areas that are not covered in the concurrent list so that we have say over those areas. And then once we have a say over those areas, then we work towards find ways. And this is where the Sabah action is very important. The SLS action is very important because if they go in the favor of SLS and Sabah, the money will come. And there is a lot more money now because don't forget, with the moving forward, with investments coming in, sales tax on oil and gas and all these things, there's more money available today than there were maybe 20 or 30 years ago. So let's not look at it and say that there are gaps, and because of the gaps, let's not do something about it. We need to have a very active plan moving forward from here on because there's more money now. Okay, let's camp out on the concurrent list. Let's make sure we have laws governing areas that we can both have a say in. Like I said, prevention of diseases, which is healthcare. Let's go to other areas in the concurrent list and set up laws so that we do not lose them, because if federal comes in first with laws, that then the state law cannot contradict that, because then the federal law will supersede the state laws. So what it means is that we need to come up with a state law first. And by virtue of the state law being there first, then the federal law will have to work around that rather than the other way around. Okay? So we set our flag down and we say that this is our rights. And by virtue of that, let's work with the new monies coming in from investments and what have you, and work towards narrowing that gap, the infrastructure gap and the fiscal gap. Because if we don't, we will always be just giving away our rights. And this has happened before in the past. When we lost Labuan to federal territory, what was the reason given? The reason was because we have lack of money to develop Labuan, and therefore, let's let go Labuan.
Right.
If that decision was made today, would it have been made? And I would say no. No state, no country in the world will ever lose a single inch of land, okay? But we have lost Labuan, and that is something I believe if it was decided today, that same thought would not have worked in us losing Labuan, because the thought saying that you have no insufficient funds to develop a particular place, and this was also the reason why we lost energy at that time, because we didn't have the money to develop our energy requirements, and therefore we pass it on to the federal government. So these are examples of how, by virtue of this infrastructure gap and by virtue of this lack of funds, we have lost many things which we should not have.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and interesting when you mentioned about Sarawak, right? And at this point now, Sabah is just saying that we have to mimic what Sarawak is doing. Before this, Sarawak was looking at us, but now of course, it went the other way around. So, what could we actually possibly learn from Sarawak in dealing with this whole situation? I mean, not talking about decentralization, because they're very actively doing that, but again, in negotiation with federal government, perhaps.
I think what is quite obvious is this.
Yeah.
Whenever Sarawak goes to negotiate, they negotiate with one voice.
Yeah.
That's very, very clear. Okay, there's one voice. And I think the problem with Sabah is we have been very fragmented in our voices.
Yeah.
And because we are not going with one voice, it's very easy to split us up. And when you have many voices, what does that mean? You just make noise. Okay? When you have many voices, noise is created. And because noise is created, there's not one single voice that is speaking, and there's mass confusion due to the too many voices. So this, I find, is the biggest thing that hampers Sabah in negotiations. It's much better now, okay? For sure, it's much better now. But in the past, it always seems to have been too many voices, whereas Sarawak has always spoken with one voice. You will never hear one person saying this and then another party saying another thing. They will always agree to say one thing when it comes to negotiations. And this is what Sabah really needs to learn in order to move forward. Because when we are speaking with one strong voice, then people will listen to you rather than many different voices. And I will say, are you sure that's what the other people want? Or how about that other person? Because we are all wanting different things.
Right, and that brings me to another, another angle of question, and let's go a little bit off tangent, but this is. I think it's also connected, because Sarawak has this thing, their slogan or standard by saying that it's Sarawak first, and now Sabah, yes. Now we are getting that slogan of saying that Sabah for Sabahans now, right? It's everywhere, especially from campaigning speeches and so forth. And then I totally agree with you when it comes to, a unified voice, negotiating with federal government. Sabah leaders are rather split. Some are quiet, some are, pursuing with legal channels. And some are just remain silent, and some are just being boisterous in Parliament, but outside of Parliament, nothing really is happening. You see, so now coming back to this, and I'm asking you as a Sabahan now, Roger, right? Roger Chin as a Sabahan. Okay. Is Sabah for Sabahan now? It's just a populist slogan, or should it be the real standard of leadership, especially when we approach to the 17th states election? Should Sabahans start asking then who really is willing to fight for constitutional rights for Sabah?
I think what we number one, Sabah for Sabahans, I think needs to be clarified. And I think you put it very nicely, which is fighting for Sabah's rights. Okay, that does not necessarily mean you have to be a Sabah person. It does not necessarily mean you have to be a Sabahan person party. It doesn't mean that non-Sabahan parties or non-Sabahans will will not fit into this Sabah for Sabahan slogan. What it is about who is going to be fighting for Sabah's rights. Okay, and I think we will get to a day, and I hope during my lifetime, where we have achieved what we need to achieve, meaning we are a developed state. We have all the infrastructure that we want, and then we can talk about being more Malaysian rather than Sabahan. But until that day happens, it should be who is going to be fighting for Sabah, who's going to be fighting for Sabah. And so whether or not it is a Sabahan party, because by virtue of you being a Sabahan party may not mean anything, okay? Because if you're not fighting for Sabahan rights, or even being a Sabahan for that matter, will not mean anything. What it means is that whoever is fighting for Sabah rights must, you're right in saying, not only talk about it, you must actually do it. And the worst is not talking about it, silent, and not doing anything, okay? So whoever is, when we talk about Sabah for Sabahans, that should be the point, that it is a person who is fighting for Sabah's rights, and also making sure that something is being done about it. That to me is what Sabah for Sabahans mean, okay? Rather than just saying it has to be a Sabahan, it has to be a Sabah party, because I think that's rather naive. It should be who is fighting for Sabah's rights, and that right person is a person who's actually speaking and also doing two things. And if they're missing either one of these, then maybe they really do not fit into this Sabah for Sabahans slogan. The only question I ask is this voice clear, strong enough at this point in time? Because we have been talking about Sabah for Sabahans. This is not new. It has been going on for maybe a good decade or more, okay? But it's never gotten very far. Has it reached the time where this new wave is going to take over and find this final Sabah for Sabahan voice? And that remains to be seen in the upcoming elections.
Indeed, that will be a litmus test, right? Okay, so moving forward, I'm more interested now to talking about, to move forward rather than, of course, we have all this, court cases going on right now, but I feel that we have to go beyond MA63 now. Roger, we need people like you, especially in the state Sabah State Administration. We need more of Rogers actually, and I'm more interested in looking at the reforms that we need to have in Sabah in order for us to move forward. You see, you've been very open in your critiques about Sabah's GLC recently, right? Political appointments, lack of transparency, and so forth. Now, we've, over the last couple of weeks, or in fact, a month or so, there are current reforms underway from the state government. We've seen statements from the MOF, the chief minister, and so forth, that there are reforms underway. However, I've seen this, it's been, in fact, many years, maybe from previous governments as well, that they always say that there needs to be a reform of the GLCs. But, do you think that this is just surface level adjustment, but have you seen it really being materialized? And what's your thought about this?
I think reality is this. In order for reforms to be done, you need a very strong government. Yeah. When I say a strong government, I mean a government that has a large enough majority not to worry about whether or not they have support to form government. Right. Because what has happened is this: due to the fragmented Sabah's government, we've cobbled up a government from different parties. And by the way, I'm not advocating for one strong party. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I'm saying the reality of what is happening is this: because we have cobbled a government together by getting support from different parties, reality sets in, which is you need to then take care of everyone who supported you. Okay. And by taking care of everyone supporting you, it also means that you have to give positions to people. And this is where only a strong government, and maybe the word should be a strong united government, okay? Rather than a coalition of fragmented parties who are not united, it should be a strong united party, whether or not it's a single party or coalition party, doesn't matter. A strong united party with the same views. Because when you do that, I think I'm almost convinced now that the number of politicians who are qualified to run GLCs are not nearly where enough to go into the GLCs to run them. So remember, there are over 250 GLCs.
Yeah.
How many of the 73 politicians that we have are actually suitable to run them, right? And I think the answer is clearly not enough of them. And if it's not enough of them, what we really need to do is to make sure that qualified politicians are inside.
Okay.
And number two, professionals are actually in there. Qualified professionals are in there. This is very important because once you get that running, then let's not talk about closing down the GLCs first. I think that's rather drastic, right? Let's talk about putting the right people in first and let's give them a chance to see whether they can turn it around, right? But you cannot begin to turn it around until you put the right people inside. So rather than say, let's shut down the poor performing GLCs, it could be because of not good people in the past, right? It should be, let's give them a chance. We appoint the right people who knows what they're doing, give them sufficient time to turn it around. Only then, when they're not able to turn it around because it's very clear they're in an industry that is, for example, sunset industry, or not only sunset industry, an industry that has completely disappeared, right? They should not be in. Maybe it's time to close that down, but let's give them a chance first, okay? But in order to give them a chance, you need the right people in. So for that to happen, you need a strong, united government that does not need to reward supporters, that does not need to take care of supporters, because if you have to do that, it means that you have a lot less control. So you need control in order to make sure that you can put in qualified politicians and qualified professionals and not lose support. Because this is the fear now. If I don't take care, and all the people who are supporting me, they will not support me, and therefore I will lose government. So this is where this needs to stop from that angle. We need a strong, united government who looks at it as one voice and say that, notwithstanding we are a coalition, we will support this good governance thing. We will support that only qualified politicians will go in, not everyone goes in, and qualified professionals are there to run the companies. If you can do that, then you have a chance to start turning around the whole thing.
Right. So what would then be your top three reforms Sabah urgently needs from your perspective now? At least two, maybe.
Okay, so I think number one, notwithstanding that there's an MA63 fatigue, I wouldn't say reforms because they've been doing it, but clearly we need to finally get somewhere on negotiations. Okay? A lot of those things have actually taken place. For example, like getting back ECOS, and getting 50% rights in oil and gas assets and all of these things. They're happening, right? But we need to wrap it up as quickly as we can.
Right.
Because I think over 60 years of formation of Sabah, we are way behind now. We need to wrap things up and move forward with it. We need some clarity, some finality to all of this. So that's the first thing I think we need to do. We need to wrap things up and allow Sabah to develop how it should be developed. And remember this, by Sabah developing, Malaysia will develop. It's not a zero-sum game. It cannot be if Sabah develops, Malaysia does not develop. No. If Sabah develops, Malaysia of course will develop. Okay? So can we look at it that way? That by helping Sabah get what it's rightfully theirs, including Sarawak, Malaysia as a whole will therefore thrive. Okay, so that's one thing. The second thing is this GLC thing that we have been talking about. Clearly, we need to do that.
Yes.
Because these GLCs are big companies, they they occupy a very big space in industry. And if they occupy such a big space, we have to use the monopolies that they have in the right way. Okay, with great power comes great responsibility. So we need to wield this power responsibly, because if these, and a good example is not to say that, if you have a monopoly over provision of a certain thing, certain product or whatever, by you not performing, what it would mean is that because you're a monopoly, what it would mean is that someone else cannot bring that thing in, whatever that thing is, and prices are high because you're not being run properly. And who suffers? The people suffer. The rakyat suffers because it will trickle down to everything. Because that thing, and if it's a very core component to whatever is needed to do other things, that will raise the price of everything and the flow-on products that happens. So by virtue of GLCs being a monopoly in many areas, that has to be exercised responsibly. And in order to exercise that responsibly, please, obviously, you need the right people inside there. So I think two things, like I said, number one, we need to wrap MA63 up and get what was the spirit of MA63. And number two, we need these reforms in the GLC to actually happen and have the will to happen and not fear whether or not there is support.
Right. So, Roger, before we wrap up, what's the one hard truth Sabahan needs to confront if we're truly serious about reclaiming our rights and reshaping our future, not just on paper, but also in practice?
I think what we need to do is we need to choose the right people to form government. I think this is very crucial. And the right people does not necessarily mean the right party. It really means the right candidates. So what it means is you need to elect candidates who are prepared to speak, who are prepared to do, and rather than just thinking about which political party they are, which side of the bread it's buttered on, it should be about whether or not these candidates will be able to run Sabah properly. And when you have enough of these candidates grouping together, you will find magic will happen, because all of them are like-minded. It doesn't matter which party they come from. Because they are like-minded, they will find a common ground, and that common ground will propel Sabah forward. So the cold hard truth that Sabahans need to think about now is this. When we go to the next elections, what are we going to do? How are we going to elect whoever is going to be in power? Can I suggest to you, rather than looking at the party, please look at the candidates that are being put up and choose that candidate according to his or her ability. And like I said, because you have chosen the right candidate, they will work together. They have to work together because you've elected them. So when they all work together, because they're all like-minded, you will find that Sabah will finally be able to soar.
But I think the party should also elect the correct candidates as well, right?
That is given. That is given. So
Because
in order
if
for
you-
that to happen.
Exactly.
yes,
So if you don't have candidates that, it's just going to be the same thing over and over again. It's still going to have the same.
So, that's given.
Right.
So in order to have the right candidates, clearly the parties
The
need
party
to
needs to-
select the right candidates. Yes.
And just a bonus question. Are you going to stand?
No answer.
No answer. All right. We actually need Roger in the state administration. Anyways, thank you so much, Roger, for today. And what today's conversation has revealed is that the struggle of Sabah rights is no longer just a historical debate, but it is also a test of leadership, integrity, and as well as public and political will. Whether it is 40%, whether it is MA63 or the broader push for autonomy, what Sabahans choose to demand and defend, or perhaps dismiss in this coming election, will shape the state's future for generations. Thank you once again, Roger,
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having us, having you again here in the studio, and to help us understand. So don't forget to follow us on Spotify, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, and X, and Apple Podcasts. And we'll see you again in the next episode. Goodbye.